Hello, this is Caroline Larson, and I am presenting my language documentation project. And I titled my project Language Can Get Wild, as we'll talk about some different animals today as part of our language practice with my student. And I just think it's a good title as language can be very complex and oftentimes it can get a little wild. So I hope you enjoy my project. So as I am discussing cross-linguistic connections today, I liked this visual as I think it's important just to remind everyone of what different aspects of the levels of language are. And so thinking about my project today throughout this project and my work with my emergent bilingual learner, I was able to develop a stronger understanding or a deeper understanding of how second language is acquired and that linguistic transfer and how important it is for cross-linguistic connections. So just being able to analyze and collect that data, I was able to closely document the student's current stage of language development and just being able to bridge those theological concepts from our coursework and being able to connect that with that authentic learning, real world learning with that student. So throughout my project, I will share different details of her oral language and her literacy development, but I'm also going to just narrow in that focus on 4 key linguistic areas that we explored with my students. So those areas being phonemic differences, morphology, and syntax, and semantics. So just wanting to review those areas and just thinking about what are those areas and the differences in those areas. Just as a definition, phonemic differences are those fundamental sounds of words. And it is important how emergent bilinguals, EBs, those students are able to hear the differences and the similarities of each phoneme in English. Morphology is the word formations and being able to have those building blocks of language, morphemes, and then the syntax is the rules that govern the arrangement of phrases and sentences to create well-formed sentences. And then finally, semantics is just basically being able to find the right words, being able to interchange words in a variety of ways and for ideas and concepts as we communicate. So the student I chose is named Natalia, or as I call her, Natty. I'm going to let her introduce herself. What's your name?
Natalia Leonie Ruiz Art.
Awesome. And what grade are you going into?
4th.
And how old are you?
8.
So Natty does live on the island of Roatan in Honduras. She has attended a bilingual school from pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade. As she said, she is going into 4th grade. Her parents and her older sister do speak Spanish. What's your name? Primarily, and then her mother and her family are what we call islanders. And what grade are you going into? They were at one time a British colony, so there are those English roots as well on the island of Roatan. And since birth, so because of that, since birth, she has been consistently exposed to both English and Spanish oral language environments. However, as she is primarily in a Spanish-speaking country, I have identified her as an emergent bilingual because she does live there where we often hear Spanish in stores or at the bank. So it is the primary language spoken on the island, and she does receive most of her literacy instruction in Spanish except for her ELAR classes. So I am sharing Natty's transcript. She was talking about her big sister and talking about relaxing and just noting that Natty does demonstrate strong phonetic awareness as she shows her ability to isolate, segment, blend, and manipulate individual sounds in her English spoken language. As we will look later at this, we will also help be able to see the connections between some of the foundational school skills that she has with understanding consonant and vowel sounds, and then how that is allows her to successfully decode in some of her reading development. So at this time, I will play her transcript.
I was still 7.
Okay, you were still 7. And what happened in third grade?
Now I'm 8.
Yeah, you turned 8 in third grade. Mm-hmm.
February 2nd.
Hmm?
Now you're gonna be 15 in March.
Yeah. What do you think about that? You like having a big sister?
Not really sometimes, because last time when she was playing volleyball, she hit me on the head with the ball.
She was practicing.
No, like when we were at the school and we were playing with one student that's named Kamita that she was in fourth grade. She let us use her ball. We were 3 playing together, and when the ball went over there, Nami went to go get it, and when she threw it on the head.
Well, big sisters. Sometimes that happens. Anything else you want to tell me in your storytelling?
School?
Whatever, you're just chatting
My favorite
away.
class is going back home or recess.
Because you get to do what?
Getting relaxed on the chair. Thinking what I'm going to play with the ring. Ding dong.
You're going to do what?
Thinking what I'm going to play for when the bell ding dong.
And about ding dongs.
Yeah, ding dong.
Oh, Nancy, you're so fun.
My cousin tells me the same thing, and then she starts laughing. I think she's a funny one. Because she always laughs when she says, "Why are you so funny?" And I say, "I don't know." She's gonna start laughing.
So just want to highlight a couple things. Thinking about that morphology mistakes that she had. Thinking about the throwed is a common mistake that EBs make because it is a past tense irregular verb. And then the laugh-its, as she says at the end, thinking about not the past tense of laughed. So oftentimes those past tense verbs can be a little confusing because we're not sure if they how they change sometimes. And then the other part of it is just those syntax errors, thinking about, as she talks about not really sometimes because last time, instead of starting with just the last time she was playing volleyball. Thinking about the student that's named Camila, and she was in fourth grade instead of saying that the fourth grade student Camila. And then the whole conversation about ding dong, trying to figure out the correct word. And she uses when, I'm going to play with the ring. And she's trying to explain when the bell rings and isn't quite able to explain exactly what she's thinking. So then she uses a sound word, ding dong, trying to explain that she's going to think about, like, she's just waiting for that bell and what she's going to play after that bell rings, but being able to have that conversation a little bit about, trying to give me the explanation of what she meant, using different language. So I want to talk a little bit about the connection of translanguaging and the language connections with Natty. So Natty demonstrates a strong phonemic awareness and being able to make those language connections to support her biliteracy development. She has her ability to recognize and manipulate phonemes in both languages, being able to facilitate that cross-linguistic transfer and be able to support decoding and word recognition skills in both English and Spanish. So this proficiency provides a strong base for her literacy growth in both languages. And so just taking a couple minutes to share one of the conversations we had was when we were talking about language and we were talking about relaxing, she started having a conversation about what those words mean. So I'm going to go ahead and play some of our conversation, just being able to show the connection she has with the both languages.
It's like calming myself.
Uh-huh.
Like relaxing myself.
Mm-hmm. And how do you say that word?
I always get confused just saying that re. So I just got mad and I said it back random and then I got it.
And in English?
Calming myself.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's hard to be doing things.
Hard to be doing what?
With a handle it. Bad and stuff.
So just I think it's important that she is using her interpersonal voice and really using her language repertoire with that translanguaging and being able to actively leverage both languages. And so being able to just support her language development, what can we do? What can I do to improve that and make that connection strong and build her bilingual and biliteracy as a superpower is just continuing to practice with those irregular and regular verb practices. Oftentimes that's where she gets a little bit confused and has some uncertainty in English. And being able to just do that with interactive activities, being able to do some matching tenses and pronouns connections. Sometimes there's irregular verb bingo she could be working with. Any type of fun games just to build that. Of course, there are sentence stems to be able to practice building those as she's speaking as well. And then important to have anchor charts, making sure that those irregular verbs are somewhere. And then just again having dialogue role plays with maybe other students that are EBs as well, and maybe there are other students that do need more practice, and so being able to just identify where those mistakes are, carefully and carefully correct, and then just practice and have them do those dialogue role plays. So the next thing I worked on with Natty was her reading skills and comprehension, and we did a reading record that was grade level 3 and a Lexile number of 540. So the normal range for third grade is 520 to 820. So I started her out on the lower end of third grade, and with the idea as if she did really well that we would move up a level, but that was really where she probably is currently close to her level. Overall, she had about 11% of errors in her speech, and she self-corrected 20% of the time in her mistakes. I am going to play just the tidbit of what is highlighted just so you can hear some of those mistakes she made, and we're going to talk about those phonemic mistakes in a little bit more detail.
The doctors from a nerdy rescue center
Arrived. Uh-huh.
They gave it the rhino medical other results. Works bug a pathway out of the pit thanks to these.
And so if you notice that she has a couple phonemic mistakes And that first one, she says the word nerdy. And so she's here, she's looking at that probably as a controlled R sound. And so it is a stressed vowel sound. And so you don't necessarily hear that R sound. And then I think where it probably is more likely that she made that mistake is she probably identified not necessarily the beginning, the nerd versus the near sound, but she probably made a mistake with the D and the B. So thinking about nerby may not have made sense to her. So she changed the word completely to nerdy instead of looking at that nearby being a compound word and recognizing that is a B sound. So one of the mistakes she made, and then the next one she made was aired versus arrived. And so again, thinking about that word and being able to identify that sound versus a short a sound and that long I sound. And even when I did correct her with arrived, those V sounds and that D sound, as oftentimes those are easily mistaken, she didn't pick up on the V, then D sound, arrived. And so she missed one of those syllables in that V sound, even in her self-correct. And then the last one was works versus workers. And so again, she might have just skipped those last letters, but it did change the meaning of the reading. And so it did confuse her a little bit as she, did kind of skip that workers part. The other thing that was interesting as we started the passage is she immediately looked at the word rhino and said Reno with a question mark. And so recognizing that this was a cognate that was rhino versus Reno, and then looking at the second word, ironically, I picked one with two cognates, rescue, and she wasn't quite sure how to say it, but rescate is what she realized. And when I asked her, what do those words mean? She had a hard time explaining what a rhino was, but she knew it was an animal. And then that rescate, she could understand that was rescue. And so those were a couple different things that were interesting, and again demonstrating her ability to look at those cognates, identify words, and see if she can make those connections between English and Spanish. So the second part is the reading comprehension, and before we got into the reading questions that were written on the page, I did ask some basic questions about the story. So I'm going to go ahead and play her answer. The first question I asked her was, what was the problem?
His legs were stuck in the mud.
Uh-huh. And what happened when his legs were stuck in the mud?
She was weak.
What does weak mean?
Like,
it's a word in Spanish.
Tired and lazy.
And so, talking about the problem, I thought it was interesting when she did say his legs got stuck in the mud. When I reiterated her question back to her and said, what happened when his legs got stuck in the mud? She actually self-corrected and said she was tired. In the story, the rhino is a female, and so I thought that was interesting that she reiterated that when she went back to talking about the story, and that she was able to. I allowed her, I asked her if she could do it in Spanish or English, and she chose to explain it in English and used, she was tired, and also that she was lazy. I thought was an interesting choice of words as well. And then after that, we did have her, she read some of the questions silently, and one of them, the second one, she read aloud and had some discussion with herself on that there could be two answers here. And it was interesting as the two parts of both, there was a little part of A and a little part of B that actually still referred to different parts of the story. So what I suspect she was doing was going back into the story and trying to find that answer and walking through herself, walking through what she thought that answer may be. The important thing about that first one is she recognized the rescue center as part of the answer. So I think that's maybe why in the end she decided to go with A instead of them going with letter B. And then the last part, the number 3, is, trying to figure out what a word meaning is. It's normally a more difficult word that students may not know. And she did not get that the word was remarkable. She thought the word was remakeable. So I think that is possibly one of the reasons why it was difficult for her to answer that, because none of those answers may have made sense, or she may not have known the other vocabulary words, the similes that were there as well. So in overall, she received 2 out of 4 correctly answered with that page, but also correctly answered the questions I asked her. So the last thing Nancy and I did was we wrapped up our time doing, she did a short explanation of the story in Spanish. And just to, be able to reinforce that as students use their bilingualism to show their abilities, they're able to build that linguistic awareness and be able to deepen their cultural understanding and be able to make those connections and have confidence in both languages and know that both languages are important as they're, thinking about reading and developing that language. So she did do a sort of summarizing of the story in Spanish. She did utilize the paper as well. So some of it is not exactly correct in the way that she formed them, but you can get the idea of how she had a deep understanding of the story in both languages.
Había una vez un reino que estaba atascado en la tierra.
Ajá, sí. ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué es el problema?
El reino estaba bien cansado.
Sí.
Y no tenía energía.
Ajá, muy bien.
Su pierna estaban atascadas.
Sí.
Ella estaba intentando salir.
Ajá.
Los doctores salvaron centro. Vinieron en India, a donde estancaron centro es localmente trabajadores y sector ayudarnos y otros animales cuando están trabajando, ellos se ponen cansados.
So again, I think it's one of the important things is as we're looking at activities and doing reading is to allow those students to be able to do that translanguaging and be able to take the time to think about what those words might be. How do I explain something in the other language? Be able to do turn-in talks with students. If you have some EBs that are maybe not as higher level, being able to have that, just that time and that minute for, a student such as Nati to turn and talk with a student that may not have a deeper understanding of the story, and work with that and be able to explain it to each other and just use their home language in another way to ask questions and deepen their understanding of what they are reading. So a couple of things when I found a classroom sample of her work. The first thing I noticed was that she used the word cupcakes instead of cupcakes. So I think it's important to practice those short vowel sounds, up versus up, and being able to see where her tongue and her mouth is when she is practicing those different words. And then as the second sentence, Jasmine's mom gave us can this when we got out of the pool. My guess is that she is looking at that word can this as thinking about that th as a the, so can these instead of this. And so I think, again, this is one of those important areas where to take time with students on the th sound and recognizing that it does make two different sounds. And then it's important for them to also just notice that both of the and the are a little bit different, and the sounds like D. So it would be important for her to practice with mirrors and actually take a little bit of time explaining where her tongue is on top of her teeth, that top dental ridge, and being able to practice that the the versus the d duh, as she can notice that she closes her jaw and that alveolar sound where the tongue is near the tooth line or tooth ridge, but it is not touching her teeth. And so I think it's important just to practice that quite a bit with her to make sure she understands those are three different sounds. And then being able to think when she hears candy, she recognizes it. The other thing I noticed in her writing is that she often switches out the B and the D sound. So just taking time to practice that and recognize that B is a voiceless and the D is a voiced consonant. And so being able to have her feel that and feel that vibration as those are different, I think that would help her in her writing and maybe making less mistakes when she sees those letters. And finally, the last things to notice is that she did make a mistake with the word when 2 times. And so noticing that when is a sight word, and when, what, where, those question words oftentimes are confusing for students as they do have that WH. And so having those, around the room, being able to practice with sentence stems, practicing questions, just being able to practice that and recognize that they are a sight word that they need to remember that there is an H there as well. And then out of the pool, at the pool, just recognizing that A and out sound. Last thing is that when it was time to blow the cake when Jasmine finished her birthday party. So I believe she meant to say blow out the candles when Jasmine finished her birthday party. Finish an S. So just making a time again to recognize that she is making small phonemic errors that just needs a little bit more practice in building those vowel sounds. And as we wrap up our time, I think it was really important. The last couple things we talked about was how she explained her writing to me. And so one of the sentences she put together was, cats can be scared without the ed if you put cucumber. And I'm going to play how she justified the way she spelled cucumber, and it's just interesting to see how she thinks about those words in English. Explain to me how you say cucumber.
Cucumber.
Is that what you put in A-M?
Yeah.
Why? What word sounds like that word?
Come.
Come? How do you spell come?
C-O-M.
So again, just thinking about even the way she self-corrected, she originally said C-A-M, thinking came, and we know that is an irregular regular verb, so thinking about came and come, and then she thought about it was a C-U-M because of the sound, and then went back to a C-O-M. And so I thought it was interesting just to be able to see how she was thinking about it, and even though she didn't get to the C-U-M, being able to self-correct closer to the sound that it actually makes. And then finally, the last part of that is the word relajándome. As she was talking about relaxing earlier on, we had that conversation. And I just wanted to bring this back and kind of wrap up how she demonstrated the way she thinks about how this word is pronounced and how she sets it up in her mind to say it. Say it again.
Relajándome.
The way you just said it before that?
Relajando.
And I think that was just a perfect summary of, being able to really compare how our EBs think about English and the struggles they have with trying to put together the words that sometimes don't always make sense. They don't always seem to be written the way they sound, and then the importance in Spanish of those syllables and how that language is very focused on the syllables and putting words together. And that takes me to my final part of the presentation. I thank you for taking the time to listen to my research and all the exciting things that I have learned doing this project, as well as just keeping things wild. I think that was one of the things that I really did learn, is that learning, a different language, learning one language can be very wild. And so putting cats and rhinos together, I figured was the appropriate way to say thank you and gracias. And last but not least is my reference and citations page. Thank you.